What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today I am going to be bringing you part 3 of my Journey to Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore series. I've already talked about the first 2 Harry Potter films, so today I will be talking about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, one that many people consider to be the best in the series. What do I think of it? Well, let's find out, shall we? Right off the bat, it was very obvious to me that it was a different director behind the camera. It is Alfonso Cuarón directing this film, unlike Christopher Columbus, who did direct the first 2. And that's not a bad thing at all. He brings a lot to this movie, and there are a lot of intricate shots and very creative sequences in the way that they are executed, and I feel that is due to Cuarón's direction. I haven't seen a lot of other films that Cuarón has directed, but he did bring a lot to this movie. I feel like this film also delivers exposition far better than the first 2 films. In the 2 prior films, exposition was mostly delivered to the audience through scenes of characters sitting around and talking. And while you do have that in this film, it's almost always delivered in some sort of creative sequence. One primary example is the night bus scene towards the beginning of the film, where Harry sees Sirius Black on a newspaper and asks who that is, and we and Harry are told at least who we are meant to believe Sirius Black is, and that's all the information you need to know at that point in time. You're given all the information you need to know in a very short amount of time, and it's in the midst of a very creative, fast-moving sequence, and thus the pacing of the film is not sacrificed to deliver you exposition. There are also just a lot of nice individual moments in this film, just small moments between characters and little subtle moments. Like, I love all the sequences between Lupin and Harry just talking about Harry's parents and how he knew them. There's just a lot of sweet character interactions and moments that I really cherish. And, you know, Snape stepping in the way of all the children when Lupin turns into a werewolf. That's just kind of a nice moment. It shows Snape's true compassionate side coming through. And I also love that this film does kind of take on a more serious tone while still carrying the same charm and fun of the first 2. Despite the fact that Christopher Columbus has stepped away and it is now Alfonso Cuarón stepping in, you still have, John Williams' music in there, but even that does take on a different sense. The first 2 films had very similar scores, and I thought it was a different composer for the third, but it is still John Williams, and that's very interesting because you do, of course, have the classic Harry Potter themes in there, but there are a lot of new pieces of music introduced in this film that would not have fit in the first 2. The first 2 films use a lot of similar music, and this one very much differs from the first 2 in its tone in a multitude of ways, and also the music, which I think is kind of interesting, but it still does have that charm to it that the first 2 had, whereas with, I feel, some of the later ones, they get very dark and depressing, and they lose that fun sense that the first few had. I believe that's most of the positives out of the way. I don't even need to mention how fantastic the casting is. I mentioned that in the first 2 videos, but if I talked about how great the new actors they introduced in this film are, then we'd be here all day. But the casting is just great in this series all around. Overall, this film does have a lot of great elements, as previously stated, but I don't quite like it as much as the first 2, and there are some things that drag it down and just some weird moments that stuck out to me more than they did in the first 2. For example, in the Shrieking Shack sequence, where you have the standoff between Snape, Sirius, and Lupin, Harry points his wand at Snape and goes, "Expelliarmus," and that somehow blasts Snape through, like, a bunch of curtains. Like, that should have just disarmed him of his wand. I know they needed to get Snape out of that altercation, but at the same time, that doesn't really make any sense. Like, why did it blast Snape in the chest rather than disarm him of his wand? And also, I noticed that When Lupin turns into a werewolf, nobody bothers trying to use spells on him. They don't even try. Like, I know he's your friend, but it's life or death. You gotta try something. At least try stunning him or something. Like, they just kind of stand around as if they've forgotten that they have wands that they can cast spells with. So they just wait around until he's in range to attack. I just found that kind of strange on this viewing. And I do think this is one of the weaker points in the series for the main trio's acting. There are just a lot of moments where I feel they were required to emote, and they didn't do so successfully.
He was that friend!
I trusted you! And all this time, you've been his friend.
This wasn't a problem in the first two films because I felt they did a really good job of playing the young, naive children who Harry, Ron, and Hermione were meant to be at that point in time. But now that the story is getting a little bit more mature and their characters are getting more mature as well, I feel they were required to bring a little bit more to their characters than they were really able to through their acting. That's obviously just me. I think they do get a lot better, but I just find it weird that people complain about them, especially in the first two films, where I feel this film is one of the weaker points in the series overall for their acting. It may be a lost cause to complain about this, but I'm going to anyway. The time travel in this film almost makes sense. It's actually pretty well integrated into the story, and the way it was written was that once Harry and Hermione travel back in time, they don't just influence events that have happened already and change them slightly. Them going back in time is what solidified what happened already, if that makes sense. The events that have already transpired in the film always happened with them traveling back in time. And this mostly lines up. You have Hermione throwing some sort of shell at the jar and throwing another one at the back of Harry's head, and that was something earlier in the film where I was like, what was that? Or Hermione turning around and going, I thought I just saw, never mind. Like, there are a lot of moments like that, but one moment that does not make any sense to me is when Buckbeak is executed, because earlier in the film you have Harry, Ron, and Hermione go up on the hill, they watch as the executioner brings down the axe in this very dramatic moment, and then Hermione starts crying, and it's meant to be this very emotional moment. But later in the film, Harry and Hermione go up, they get Buckbeak, they take him away, and then the executioner just ends up chopping a pumpkin in rage, and, I mean, I guess Harry, Ron, and Hermione must have been very attached to that pumpkin that got destroyed, because if they're trying to say that all the actions would not have happened without them having time traveled, then that means that Buckbeak would never have been executed, right? Like, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because then Harry, Ron, and Hermione would have seen Harry and Hermione come out of the forest, take Buckbeak away, and watch the guy chop the pumpkin. Everything else lines up pretty well, but it's that one little detail that stuck out to me on this viewing. With all of that said, though, that's about all I have to say about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. On a filmmaking level, this movie is fantastic. The visual effects really do all hold up extremely well, especially the transformations from human to animal, particularly Peter Pettigrew turning into a rat or Lupin turning into a werewolf. There are just a lot of striking visual moments in this movie, and you can see Newt Scamander's name on the Marauders map when Fred and George give it to Harry. Just figured I'd mention that. Despite that, though, this film does have some just weird moments and discrepancies that stick out to me more than they do in the first two. That may not bother you guys as much as it bothers me, but it just pulls me out of it a little bit. But overall, this is a really fun movie. I always have a blast rewatching it, and it is one of the better Harry Potter films, because next week, you're gonna get to hear me rant a little bit more, because Goblet of Fire is where I feel things start to go downhill a little bit for this series, but you'll have to wait until next week to hear my thoughts on that one. You guys please let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban? Of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.